Ladies and gentlemen, the R3 podcast is back. Welcome to episode 9. It has certainly been a while. I hope you're all safe and well. I see in the absence of this podcast, Stephen Bartlett's podcast, Diary of a CEO, has taken the podcast market by storm. Well, sorry, Stephen, I am back and ready to take the throne. To celebrate the return of the podcast, I have a fantastic episode for members about the Moratorium process, which was introduced by the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act 2020. Today I am joined by two guests, Rob Harding and Benji Dymant from Teneo, who acted as joint monitors of the Corbin and King intermediary holding companies and trading subsidiaries to discuss their experiences as monitors, the success of the moratorium, and how they see the process being used by IPs in the future. Rob Harding is head of mid-market financial advisory with Teneo in London and leads their national private markets restructuring business, including the special situations M&A team. He has a focus on accelerated M&A, which involves working with a variety of clients, both sellers and buyers, to secure successful going concern outcomes in situations where a full traditional M&A process may not be possible, utilising insolvency as a delivery mechanism if and when required. Rob has 21 years of experience working in the restructuring arena and advises a variety of stakeholders in stressed and distressed situations, principally corporates, lenders and directors. Benji is a director and licensed insolvency practitioner with Teneo in London. Benji has 13 years of experience in the restructuring industry, focusing on contingency planning, options analysis and insolvency. Over the last 24 months, Benji has focused on the retail and licensed retail sector, advising companies such as Corbin and King, Clark's, Yum, Victoria's Secret, Drake and Morgan, Karen Millen, and Regis Supercuts. Benji previously spent 15 months in Santander's restructuring team. Just to add, Deloitte's UK restructuring business was purchased by Teneo in 2021. Like with all podcasts, it is important to stress that whilst care has been taken in the preparation of this podcast, it is intended for general guidance only and does not constitute legal advice. Let's begin. Welcome to the R3 podcast. Thank you for coming on. How are you both?
Good, thanks, Ben. Good to be talking to you this morning, and also the broader audience as well. Starting to see signs of the market picking up a little bit after what's been quite a quiet year, so good to be talking to you, particularly in relation to such a sort of topical and interesting job that we've recently been doing.
No, thank you for coming on. So I expect you're both very busy at the moment, so let's just get on with the episode. Your appointment as joint monitors resulted in a successful going concern protection and solvent refinancing of the Corbin and King restaurant group. Firstly, well done. I'm sure the drafters of Seagull will be happy with this success, as I know they were keen for the moratorium process to be a key tool for IPs. So let's kick off with, can you provide members with some background to the appointment, and why was the moratorium deemed appropriate for this particular case?
That one. So it all happened quite quickly, to be honest, and that's as a product of the situation which Rob will go into. Ultimately, we received a call from a legal contact of ours at Rosenblatt asking if we would be willing to consider the monitor appointment and told us that it would be necessary for us to do that the next day. The urgency was really as a result of a secured lender demanding repayment of its debt in full within 24 hours, and the group just didn't have the cash on hand to pay it. However, they did believe that they were a solvent going concern business as a result of an offer that was on the table at the time.
Just building upon that, the two key things that someone taking a monitor appointment needs to satisfy themselves on are that it would effectively support continuation of the business as a solvent going concern, point one. So you have to get comfort on that. And point two, that during the period of the moratorium, the business can meet its obligations effectively in that period as they fall due. So there's two key tests, really. And candidly, sort of learning as we go, this was only the second monitor appointment that we've been involved in. I know that only a few around today. So fundamentally, that's what you have to get comfortable with. As Benji said, there was effectively a solvent refinancing offer on the table that wasn't quite at the stage where it was acceptable to all stakeholders, but it was at a sufficiently advanced stage that we were comfortable that it effectively underpinned the fact that there would be a solvent outcome to the group. So you'd either do that deal or there would be a better one. It effectively provided a sort of a floor, but confirmation that there should be a solvent exit. It was well diligenced, well articulated bid and tabled by a credible, very well funded US investment fund. And therefore, on that basis, and with a review of the go forward cash flow, we got comfortable, literally, as Benji said, within 24 hours, effectively putting our name to the moratorium process because we were comfortable on those 2 points, which you have to then continue to reevaluate almost daily through the process. But that's basically the background. It was a call with 24 hours notice, some quick diligence on a bid and a cash flow, and then effectively the court file.
Right. I didn't realise this was your second moratorium. You'd be classed as veterans now in the moratorium program.
if there is such thing in such a sort of newly developed, not particularly frequently used process, this is not the audience to go into detail on the other one, but about a year or so ago, we had a similar situation where there was a solvent refinancing lined up that, for whatever reason, wasn't acceptable to the existing secured lenders, but was put forward by the equity. And I think that will be a theme that you see in terms of where these processes are used. It will be where there is effectively a clear path to a solvent outcome, but for whatever reason, there has been a disagreement between existing financial stakeholders.
Great. I understand that an application to the court was made by an entity that provided loan facilities to the group's ultimate holding company, should we say Topco. So as the monitors would not terminate the moratorium on the basis that the opcos were not in a position to pay the sums demanded under the guarantees. Can you provide some background to this challenge?
Yeah, sure. So you're right. The secured lender did raise a challenge. They formed the view that the monitors were incorrect in forming the view that the group could be rescued as a going concern, which, as Rob said, is the key declaration that we had to make when the companies all entered into the monitorship. And they felt that actually the monitorship was causing them undue harm by not being able to enforce their security and ultimately place the trading subsidiaries into administration. We clearly took a different view, otherwise we wouldn't have taken the appointment, and we maintained that view and continue to assess it daily. Our view was that there was a deliverable offer which would see them as the secured lender repaid in full, and so we couldn't see how harm was possibly being caused to them as a creditor. More so, actually, had the trading businesses been placed into administration, based on our experience of dealing with a number of different dining and casual dining businesses, particularly over the period of the pandemic, it was clear to us that actually significant harm would have been caused to those businesses had they entered into administration. The working capital would have been accelerated, there would have been issues with landlords, it's always a very distressing, disturbing time for the employees. Ultimately, a huge amount of uncertainty could have really taken the legs away from what are excellent businesses with a great customer base. And so we formed that view that the underlying business was strong, we'd seen the financials, we'd seen the liquidity, and it was in the interest of all the stakeholders that the trading entities were preserved, didn't go into administration, and in fact doing so didn't cause anyone any harm.
And just to add to that, the secured lender having demanded their money back at 24 hours notice, there was a solution that could immediately facilitate that. So it seemed like the obvious thing to do to carry on providing protection whilst that transaction, or as I mentioned earlier on, a better one, but still a solvent one, could be implemented.
I think we'll touch upon this, but the legislation is clear that the monitor must bring the moratorium to an end if the monitor thinks that the company is unable to pay a debt for which there is no payment holiday. So how confident were you that Topco would be able to discharge its debt? Were there moments where you thought we need to terminate, or did you look the tiger in the eye, as they say, and thought terminated would not lead to a successful outcome, and you held your nerves?
So it's an interesting question, and it's probably a little bit more nuanced because Topco itself wasn't actually under our control as monitors or part of the monitorship. It was in administration with FRP. So interestingly, the borrower itself was in administration, and the entities which were in monitorship were all the guarantor entities. Now, it quickly became apparent that it wasn't going to be necessary for the borrower to repay the Topco, and actually it may be possible for a guarantor to obtain the funding to settle the liability. And we continue to assess this on a day-by-day basis as the offer from the US fund evolved and as they continue to sort of firm up their position. And I don't think it was a case of holding our nerve, really. The offer from Knighthead Fund, who provided the financing, existed prior to our appointment. Very shortly after our appointment, all the diligence matters that they needed to deal with were sorted. And then they, in fact, sort of made their offer even better, made it more flexible. And as such, it was just clear that the secured lender would be repaid in full. Had at any point we formed the view that that wasn't going to happen, and then actually, going back to that harm point, that harm was being caused to them by forming that view, we may well have resigned. And frankly, we wouldn't have held our nerve or anything like that. We'd have exited office.
It was evident from day one that there would be a solvent outcome to the situation because, as we mentioned before, there was a solvent refinancing proposition on the table from a credible party that, as Benji said, was then, I think this is in the public domain through the court papers, was then improved upon sort of 2 or 3 times. So the test for the monitor in relation to solvent outcome, it wasn't, you used the expression holding your nerve, and it wasn't, let's be honest, it was a reasonably contentious situation, as people have probably seen from the court action. So we kept the position under continual review, but actually what we needed to do was fairly obvious, given that there would obviously be a solvent outcome to the situation. And obviously there was some legal debate in relation to how quickly the repayment needed to be made, given the fact that the Topco was not in a position to make that repayment immediately. And hence, as Benji said, was the funding was ultimately routed through the subsidiary companies. The situation was clearly one that would be resolved solvently, and therefore it wasn't something that concerned us, but it was something that we assessed daily as we went through the process.
Great. Like you said, assessing daily is key. I think I know the answer to the next question, considering you're veterans now of the moratorium process. But given the success of this one, would you consider another appointment as monitor?
Yeah, absolutely. It would be dependent on the circumstances. Fundamentally, the IPs have got to make a declaration to court, which is clearly a very serious thing, and you need to be very comfortable making that declaration. It needs to be based on evidence and the facts that you have at the time and the information provided by the directors. If you can get comfortable with the information provided, and if you can get comfortable to make that declaration, then yes, because the process that should be used to help rescue businesses, and all the more process we have that can do that, the better for our insolvency regime and corporates out there.
And as Benji said, it will be fact specific, and it's not. We don't envisage a scenario where the moratorium process comes in and radically reduces the number of, for example, administration filings. But in scenarios, as I said earlier on, I think where you potentially have financial stakeholders in disagreement, but an obviously solvent outcome, I think that is a situation that does lend itself to the use of the process. Or indeed, if you have a situation where potentially you have a CVA or restructuring plan that is pretty well developed and likely to succeed, but you need some protection from creditor action whilst you get it across the line, I think that's another area in which you may see these used.
Great. Okay, thank you. So if there is a member out there right now considering a monitor appointment, what advice would you give to that member?
I think it comes back to that point. It's make sure you get the information you need pre-appointment. You should not go into this blind. So the two that we have done, one has been, I think, Rob, your first one was a holdco.
Yeah.
Corbin and King clearly are trading businesses. Holdco slightly easier because you don't have the sort of accruing liabilities on a day-by-day basis. You may still have something that doesn't have a payment holiday that needs to be refinanced or repaid. Where you have a trading business that is accruing liabilities day by day, you really do need to understand whether that business is profitable or cash generative in the period, and also consider what does the payment moratorium mean for those creditors or suppliers who are subject to it, and will there be sufficient monies that you can either make some payments to them to help the rescue of the going concern, or in fact, can you keep them on board for the period of the monitorship whilst you do whatever rescue it is that you're doing? So I think information is key. Working closely with the management team prior to and then during the appointment is also very important.
Great. Okay. So thank you both. This has been a really interesting discussion and something I'm sure members will enjoy. I think you both highlighted some key messages for members to take on board. And well done on the successful outcome.
Thank you very much, Ben. Good to talk to you.
No, you're welcome. But before we go, and with all guests on the R3 podcast, I ask this question. What is the one thing that you have learned during your career so far that has stayed with you throughout?
So it was actually something that I was told in my first week. If you ever have to make redundancies at a abattoir or a butcher's, make sure you take the meat cleavers off them first.
I like that one.
Nice words. Mine actually goes back to the employee stuff that Benji's mentioned, was no matter how junior or senior you may be or how close to the administration of redundancy process you may be, always ensure that you're fully up to speed in terms of the current entitlements and legislation surrounding employees, because there's nothing more embarrassing in a highly sensitive situation than not being able to answer a worried employee's query if they happen to bump into you in the corridor. And that has stuck with me throughout, because what we do is very interesting, commercially challenging at times, but in the middle of it all, there are people who are concerned and distressed. And it's the human aspect of them that is sometimes the more difficult to deal with than the technical aspects. So always brush up on the ERA if you're heading out on sites. And that's stuck with me for the last 22 years.
Yeah, I totally agree with that one. I think in the first year of being in the profession, I was sent to a warehouse to make redundancies. And yeah, I wasn't prepared. But ever since then, I was. So it does stay with you, bad experiences, but it's learning from them. That's the main thing.
Correct.
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Bye.
Have a good day. Thank you for listening to this latest episode of the R3 podcast. I hope you found the discussion informative and useful. I wish to thank Rob and Benji again, and thank everyone who has taken the time to listen. Should any members wish to be a guest on the R3 podcast, please contact me. My contact details are on the R3 website, or simply message me on LinkedIn.